Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to our panel this afternoon. Just quickly, I'm just going to run down the line of panelists here. I'm just going to get each of you to quickly introduce yourself, kind of where you work, and briefly what you're doing with XR in your own businesses. So just super quick, though. Alex?
Hey there, guys. My name is Alex Coulomb. I'm the creative director of Agile Lens Immersive Design, and we actually consult with architects and other people in the AEC industry to help them see strategies and opportunities to use VR in their workflows, everything from design over to representation and marketing.
Hi, I'm Martin Entered from IKEA. I run something we call IKEA Digital Lab, where we are looking into the future interface for the customers that we think will be three-dimensional in some way. And I'm also part of creating the VR stuff we have put on Steam and those kind of things. So.
O'Brien Chalmers, founder of Steel Blue. Myself have a background in architecture and affinity for art and design and technology. Steel Blue is a creative agency based in San Francisco focused on communicating developers and architects' visions. We've been using VR for the past few years, both 6 degrees of freedom and static 360 renderings.
Hi, my name is Scotty Woody. I am the firm-wide creative media manager at Gensler, and we're using VR and AR and all that throughout the entire design process from early conception all the way to the end with marketing with our clients.
And I'm David Scott. I'm the Director of Business Development at Transparent House, and we're a creative agency based in San Francisco. We're a 3D CGI studio that leverages photorealism, and our goal has been to make VR look as good as it possibly can. We've been leveraging our photorealistic skills to kind of drive adoption in VR, both in mobile and in real time.
And my name is Jeff Model. I'm the founder of CG Architect, which is an online community for professional architectural visualization artists. So I'll be the moderator of the panel today. So before we get into the questions, one of the things that we do at CG Architect is try to keep a pulse of what's going on in the industry, and we do that through a number of mechanisms, including market research and surveys. So we did a survey back in mid-2016 asking some specific questions about where architecture was with VR, AR, MR. And we've just recently did that survey again, and I sent it out to, I think, a lot of the people that registered. Just as a show of hands, how many people here ended up participating in the most recent survey? Okay, that's great. So we had about 500 people that took the survey. So I'm just going to quickly run through a couple of the results and sort of show how that's evolved since 2016. Yeah. All right, so this is just showing where people that took the survey were located. Obviously primarily Europe and US, a little bit of Asia. Industry affiliation of the people that took the survey, what sort of work are they doing within the industry? Primarily viz companies and architectural firms, kind of closely followed by freelancers and engineering. And just as a note, all of these slides that we'll see through the presentation are all available to download as well. So it's one of the handouts. So if you miss something, don't worry about trying to photograph it. We'll be able to get that to you. So one of the questions we asked is whether or not people were using XR, XR being VR, AR, MR, in production this year and projected into next year. So we have kind of a comparison between the last survey we did and the new survey. And I think the fact that we're seeing very little change between 2016 and now into 2017, I think is probably an indicator that we've kind of reached the peak of the hype within our own industry. I mean, obviously, VR and whatnot have been around for quite some time in many industries, but I think we've hit the peak of our industry. So I think from now is where we start to probably see a little bit of a decrease in the excitement, but at the same time, a lot of maturation of the technology and some really interesting stuff that starts to get done that's going to have some significant impacts on what we do. This is a list of the HMDs that were used in production on the last survey. You can see that the Rift and the Gear VR and Cardboard were tops of the list. And this is what the survey that you guys all took. This is the results from that. So we're starting to see a whole bunch more HMDs that are starting to get a little bit of traction, as you can look at the bottom. The one thing that was really interesting comparing the two is there was a 16% increase of usage of the Vive in the last year, but a decrease in the Rift, the Gear VR, and the Cardboard, obviously in favor of Vive and all of those other HMDs. So I think what we're seeing here is a lot of experimentation, people getting a little bit more comfortable with what's going on in the industry and kind of deciding what platform is going to work best for what they're doing. And this is whether or not people are doing or using XR technologies in R&D. So if you're not using it in production, are you investigating how these technologies might work? And obviously 78% this year indicated that they are. Again, not a huge change from last year, so I think sort of speaks to what I said earlier. And you can see here a list of the HMDs that are being used in R&D this year. So with the panel discussion, I guess the question I want to ask now, obviously just based on the survey results that we saw there, do you guys feel like much has changed in the last year, 2016 to 2017? I mean, are we much further ahead now compared to where you guys were in 2016 in terms of adoption of the technologies, the challenges you're running into, the types of developments and experiences you're creating? Has it changed much, or are we kind of in the same place? Open it up to whoever wants to take that first.
Yeah, I can just say that in my experience and the firms that I've been working with, there's much more interest in trying to incorporate it as part of the design process, whereas before, I think the interest was primarily how do we use this to sell, for our services based on projects that are already completed. So that's been the biggest trend I've seen.
Yeah, I can continue. The difference we have done so far is that the first things we did was just plain rooms where you could visit. And the difference now is we're trying to use it and testing it internally to do kind of knowledge transfer, those kind of things. But then, yeah, that's the main difference, really. We're still struggling with the pipelines.
Yeah, I would agree with Alex. It's starting to become what I'm seeing a lot more design focused and presentation focused is often taking away the VR and just show me some real time. I think we'll see a lot more XR and MR, AR sort of this year and next year with development of AR Core, AR Kit. We'll see a growth in that, but VR is fundamentally what we're seeing, very similar to what we were doing last year.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and echo a lot of that too. I think AR is going to blow up quite a bit this next year, now that it's hitting pretty much everyone's mobile devices. At Gensler, for the most part, I would say we've probably hit that plateau as well. It's pretty commonplace that if a project wants to use VR, they can jump right in and do it, and it's not really an issue. So it's starting to become just as natural as us doing renderings.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is if we can get to untethered real time, that might change things in terms of the desire to have the viz kind of drive it more than the design side. I think the danger is on the design side, it becomes an internal business tool, and you need the viz side to really drive public adoption of VR, and it's essential to kind of keeping things innovative and moving forward. And so I think that untethered real time could be a kind of game changer there. Other than that, I completely agree with you guys.
So one of the other questions that we asked was whether or not companies were generating revenue with their XR initiatives. I'm just curious, kind of going down the line. I mean, I know some of you guys, it's not part of the way you have it set up, your business model, but for kind of those who are you earning money from it, or is it as much as you had hoped or expect? Do you think it's
never as much as you hope, right? We started up THVR, the branch of Transparent House that dealt strictly with VR about 2 or 3 years ago. And we started monetizing real estate right away. So our first client was a paid client that drove the development of the department. I haven't seen any let up there in terms of the real estate side for Viz. We don't do a lot of design side work. Sometimes for interior design, we'll use the tool for that. But we've seen monetization in real estate consistent through the years, the last 2.5 years at least. On the product side for us, because we have a lot of product clients, electronics manufacturers and so forth, it's a tougher code to crack. There's sort of a question is how advertisers will use the technology in advertising for product. So we're trying to kind of dwell in that space as well and try to help crack that code and monetize there as well. But on the real estate side, yeah, we've done really well from the start, and I don't see any slowdown. So.
Yeah, we have a few projects that go into straight monetization, but we found the tool to be more helpful during the design phase, and we've seen a massive return on investment in terms of having that tool making design decisions faster and more accurately. We've seen a big return on that.
In VR, monetization right away. I mean, we've been creating
QTVRs for 23 years, and so it was sort of an easy step to give us another device to view those. So that's been successful for the past 3 or 4 years. AR and MR, not yet. It's more of a research phase for us right now.
Yeah, we released an AR thing on the iOS devices. I don't know if you've seen it, IKEA Place. And it's become quite big. A lot of people are using it. And when it comes to revenue, we don't really count it from that because we get revenue from sales somewhere else. But it's getting a lot of traction.
Since AgileLens is a consultancy, all of our revenue, in fact, is from our XR initiatives. And just piggybacking a little bit on what Scott was saying, you know, it's interesting that a lot of companies, rather than thinking of it in terms of generating revenue, it is very much a cost saver and a time saver, which you could interpret as a way of making money.
So the next question was we asked people how difficult they found it to find qualified people to manage, develop, and research their XR initiatives, and on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being really easy, 10 being really difficult, the average was about 6. So I'm curious, you know, given that many of you have staff in-house that are now doing this, how hard is it, and kind of how did that evolution happen of when you decided you wanted to get involved with these technologies to find the people to run those, and then as you grew, how hard was it to find additional people to help with that?
So I mean, I think we try to stack the deck in terms of the people that we have on board at Transparent House. We've got people with architecture backgrounds. We've got people with industrial design backgrounds. I come from a film background. So I think doing that gives us sort of entree into the creative side of things, and that's mostly what I'll speak to here in terms of VR today. You know, we never had any trouble finding people, I think. I think there's a good talent pool in San Francisco. We just got lucky in terms of being in that region. So we've always had the people on hand to kind of do what we need to do. But I think we try to kind of curate our staff a little bit more to be, to have diverse backgrounds, to give us sort of that, that creative edge that we need to sort of succeed. We transitioned from a viz agency to a full service creative agency over the past couple of years. And so the creative background side of it all was much more important to us. But I think, in direct answer to the question, I haven't seen any trouble so far just being in that region. So.
Yeah, so I'm looking at a much broader scale. I would agree with this figure. We have a lot of designers internally who are really, really interested in this, and then some who just aren't, and it's just part of the job, so they do it. So we definitely try and curate that talent pool internally that already exists, but now we're starting to realize that if we want to push the needle forward a little more, that we are going to have to go out and hire more creative talent specifically to Viz and VR.
The panel is so organized with the way we answer our questions. It's in line. We've had more success training internally than bringing people in externally, and maybe it's as a creative agency, our existing pool of talent knows sort of what we believe in, sort of what our brand's about, sort of how to craft a story over sort of how to technically do something. What we've had with people that we brought in that are very technically focused sort of lacked the communication and sort of art to be able to tell the right kind of story, which I think is really important in these experiences.
Martin, I should talk first.
Yeah, do that.
Just to break it up. Yeah, so an interesting thing we've found is, you know, I'm based out of New York City, and there's a lot of talented coders, people with computer science backgrounds, people who have the technical ability to help with these initiatives. There's a real lack of people who have a design sensibility, especially when it comes to fields like architecture, who actually know how to make something that's going to be a you know, well-curated, well-designed experience for the user. So, you know, I meet people all the time who I can give a very complicated design problem to, and they can come up with a functional working prototype of that very quickly. But it's, you know, if it's a UI, it's not going to be legible. If it's a teleportation system, it's probably going to make people sick. So there's a lot of effort that we put into working with people who are thinking very much about the human experience and how that should be designed.
One of our biggest problems then is actually getting people to know that IKEA is interested in doing this overall. We are not really the company you look for when you are a game developer or something like that. So that's one of the reasons I'm out talking at this kind of event, of course. That's one of the things. But then we have had the same kind of trouble before. We are using computer graphics a lot to create normal images. And the first 5, 6 years before people knew that we were doing it, we were struggling so much to get people to even apply to our open positions. And we are a little bit in the same way now when it comes to getting game devs and so on. We have open positions now, and well, we don't get like thousands of applications. We get a few, but not that many as I would like to have.
So the next one is, I mean, Scott, you had mentioned just a little bit earlier that, I lost my train of thought there. I'll just start with this. It's the question that people we asked, you know, how important do they think architecture was, or sorry, XR was in technologies, and about 72%, I guess 72 on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being the most difficult. We'll go into the next one here, but nope. Yeah, this is where actually I was going. The slides were out of order. So you had mentioned design in your firm was kind of where you saw the most benefit. How important do you think collaborative architecture or collaborative XR is in, you know, these technologies?
Yeah, I feel like both those numbers are a little low, at least from my experience. We do a lot of collaborative VR. We even internally, just for fun, we host a weekly what we call VR Jam, and we get about 21 offices doing a virtual tour of a project every week, which is a really just cool way internally how we can help share just design and ideas and the experience. But more importantly too, we're doing that with clients, and we're trying to sync up Gear VRs and other HMDs, and even creating our own multiplayer unit inside of a real-time engine. Because we realize that VR is a very siloed experience, and when you're trying to sell something, it's really awkward when you've got the headset on and I'm trying to talk to you and see what you're like. It doesn't work very well. So the big leap here, and I think we'll see it this year, is getting more than one person into that experience to help present.
Scott, what software are you guys using to do that?
We use we use a lot of Unity, but also we're using Fuser to do a lot of that collaboration, especially the VR jams, because we'll just take a Revit model and port it right in and then send out the files for the collaboration.
We are also looking into the same kind of issues, because most of the things that you do when you, even if you buy something like a sofa, you don't want to take the decision by yourself. You want to do it together with somebody. I showed it on my session earlier today. We did a thing with the HoloLens where you can be in a mixed reality thing together with a few people, and everybody can put scenes out and take away things, and it becomes a collaborative kind of fun thing to do. Yep. And it really shows the potential of what you could do. Everybody can't have a HoloLens. They're quite expensive, but it's something really nice to do experiments with.
And it's going to get there. I imagine this next year or two, I imagine we'll start seeing things like that show up on our iPhones and our Androids with the core kits. So it'll get there, for sure.
Until then, I want to get invited to one of these sessions.
Okay. Just come by the office.
Yeah, ditto on that.
It's a virtual tour.
Yeah, we'll come over to San Francisco. We'll host.
So over the last year in the kind of mainstream media in their coverage of XR technologies, they've kind of been indicating there's been a slowdown in the adoption on the consumer side of these technologies. Given that for at least for now is a pretty big driver of these technologies and how far they develop, how big of a concern is that for you and your own investments in these technologies?
For us, we try to be as tech-agnostic as possible. We're much more about the creative side of things. You know, purposing the 3D model to the technology is something we've done since we started just with renderings. In terms of VR, it was no different. It was a no-brainer for us to take on that technology and purpose our creative to that. So things are always going to change. You know, you're at CES, and one year it's 3D TV, and the next year it's HFR and 4K, and then it's Internet of Things, and it's VR and mixed reality. So you're always going to be chasing a moving target if you're trying to just focus on one technology. I think the best thing you can do is be as tech-agnostic as possible and put your content where the people are consuming it. So the slowdown doesn't really bother us that much. We've pivoted many times at Transparent House. And actually, I shouldn't even say that. I don't really see a slowdown from what we're doing on the creative side right now. But I can see the possibility of it coming. And I think you just have to remain as loyal to your creative as possible and really understand what people are looking for in terms of that side of things, and then think about the technology sort of after that.
I don't think I'm disagreeing with David here, but tell me if I am. when you say agnostic, when I think about the way we tend to use technology, we're still always exploring everything coming out. Like, you're not taking the perspective that you guys decide, this is working, and then you stick with that. You're still researching and looking at what else
we're always
there,
on
right?
deep dive R&D at Transparent House. We've got a dedicated team to VR R&D, and we're not dictating the technology. We're just accepting what kind of comes through the doors and adapting to that. There may be a case where the technology drastically changes so much that it would be an issue for us, but currently we dwell and I think O'Brien would agree, is that we dwell in the 3D model as our asset. And once you've got that 3D model and you've modeled it to 360 degrees in 3D, you can purpose it to the tech, whether it be outputting a rendering or a QTVR or a VR experience or an AR experience. So if that starts to dry up, I think we can all agree you can kind of sense when that's coming. You can kind of read the industry and see where things are slowing down, hopefully contribute to the extended growth of it and keep it going for as long as possible. But in the end, it's going to change. That's a given. That's a constant. The only constant is really change in this industry. So you have to be ready to pivot. You have to be ready to innovate and adapt.
Yeah. To me, there's two big things happening as well. There's new, innovations coming out every week in this industry, and there's a lot of fragmentation. So there's, a huge proliferation of devices and techniques and software, and, I think something we probably all struggle with is figuring out what's most useful. So, we try to make an effort in our work to at least explore every one of those new devices or software techniques as they come out, and then make a judgment call for, is this something worth, passing on to architecture firms, and is this actually going to make a difference in their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, I think I would agree. We look at it a little bit differently versus trying every piece of hardware that comes out, which we started that way.
Sure.
Just can't do it anymore. There's just too many. But we don't know what we're going to do when we start a project. It's story first. What are we going to tell, and then how do we do it? And so the technology lends itself to sort of supporting that story. Sometimes it's going to be VR. Sometimes it could be hand sketch. We don't know.
Yeah.
So you kind of just segued into my next question there. I think for the most part, what I see in the industry reminds me of a lot of when rendering kind of became photoreal 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and how it was very much a novelty and a lot of focus on the technology and not necessarily on the artistic side or the storytelling side. So how are you guys addressing that? I mean, obviously, I think you're a little bit more mature both in your studios and in your approach, but as an industry as a whole, how do you kind of reconcile trying to not get caught up in the technology and the novelty side and really try to focus on why these technologies are actually useful?
For me, my background is in architecture and design, and so, when I am testing, to be fair, not every single device in software and technique, but the ones that look like they could have relevance, I actually try to actually design with it, even whether it's a real project or a proof of concept. I really try to get into the weeds and say, okay, is this actually something that could make a significant difference?
So were you asking how important is photorealism, or?
No, I mean, I think a lot of people right now, just because the technology within our industry is still relatively new, is they tend to get hung up on the novelty and the tech rather than the storytelling and the artistic side.
Tech for tech's sake.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two sides of the coin with VR. One's tech and one's content. And I think, I might be jumping ahead here in terms of where you're going with this, but I think there's a danger in terms of jumping on the bandwagon and creating content that just is there to be involved in the space. And I think photorealism plays into that in the sense that I think it's critical to maintain quality standards. And to me, photorealism is the benchmark of quality standards for VR and real estate development and marketing and advertising for them. So if you are, if you are just jumping on the bandwagon to get content out there, it could lead to bad things in the industry. I came from 3D TV. I came from stereoscopic 3D in Hollywood, and the 3D TV protocols. I think we all know what happened to that. Everybody bought these great TVs with their glasses, and how many times did anyone use them? Do you guys use 3D TVs at home? Not a single hand, right? But we all bought that stuff. But I think what happened there was a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon and contributed a lot of bad content. There was also barriers to entry in terms of the technology. I think we have a similar risk here in VR in the sense that there's a barrier to entry right now on the tech side, and that's the goggles. A lot of people don't like to use them. And there's a barrier to entry in terms of the content. And without photorealism, without making the content better, I'm not saying photorealism is it, but without making that content better, you're going to alienate your audience, and it could lead to some problems downstream. So I think photorealism, especially in architecture and real estate development, is critical.
Yeah, we when we were starting out, we were looking into how photoreal could we get it. But one of the more important things is that we wanted to do something that you couldn't do in any other media. So in the first experience we did that went public, we shrunk you to a child size, so you could experience it as somebody else. And that for me is what makes this kind of media different. You can be longer, shorter, you can be visually impaired, you can try a lot of things that you couldn't do in any other media. And that's also why we have been mainly focusing on things where you have 6 degrees of freedom, so you can walk around 360s, the normal spherical panoramas. We haven't done much of that because it doesn't give you much extra, not from my point of view at least. So that's where we are trying to use this in a way that you can't experience it in any other way.
I find personally that photorealism has its place, but I think it's often overvalued, actually. I think people get hung up on making something look the way something is going to look when it's built, which is fantastic when a design is at that level of completion. But we've also found that VR, in many cases, especially in the AEC industry, can run the risk of A, being overwhelming, and B, drawing attention to things that shouldn't have attention on them yet. So if a project is only in concept or SD and the materials haven't been worked out for the space, you shouldn't be showing people a VR experience that has placeholder materials. It's okay for a VR experience to have white walls or more of a diagrammatic quality, because if you are only drawing attention to the important elements of a VR experience at that time, then that's when a really productive conversation can happen, whether it's with your collaborators in the design team or even the end users of an experience.
Yeah, and to add on to that, a majority of the VR renderings we do at Gensler are actually just that. They're very conceptual looking. We don't push photorealism too early. Sure, we'll have some physically based lighting and all that to kind of sell it a little more, but 9 times out of 10, the first VR renderings we're kicking out for the first couple months of the project, they're white. Maybe a little toon shading on it just to add some added definition, and that's about it. The one thing I usually like to ask my designers when they're jumping into this, it's like, why are you using VR? And it kind of helps deter that technology conversation where it's like they have to actually sit and think, like, why am I choosing this medium over just a standard rendering? And then you start getting into more of the, well, I need someone to experience what the ceiling height in this room feels like. I'm like, okay, well, that's better. Like, don't worry about the tech. We've got plenty of that to communicate that with.
I think the question why becomes even more important. I think fast forward in a few years, and photorealism isn't part of the conversation. It's automatic. It's a click of a button and you're there. I mean, granted, different stages of the life cycle. When you're in sort of design versus marketing, you're gonna want to see different output. But in a few years, I don't think it. I think the question is again why, because the photoreal is automatic.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's listening to your client for sure. I mean, for us, we just dwell on that side of it. I think we're trying to sell real estate overseas to buyers that will never come here. They're going to want to see it in photoreal quality before they make a decision like that. But absolutely agree across the board with you guys.
So next question here. So how do you guys deal with helping people, especially people who are new to VR, and perhaps this is more on the client side, avoid a negative experience with the technology that might turn them off entirely from ever using any form of this technology?
Sure. So for us, it's client education. It's just a matter of really helping them understand how to use the technology and what the benefits really are to them. Just like you were saying, O'Brien, is that what is it that you guys want to get out of this? And a lot of that comes down to listening. You know, there's a funny story. We were given our first HTC Vive live demo at the Lennar Shipyard kickoff launch. And there was a long line of people trying to come up and use the experience. And one guy was waiting for about 20 minutes, and he got up there, and I sat there and I went over like sort of what you should do and how you should use it, and he kind of nodded along and so forth. And he proceeded to, I don't know, maybe he didn't understand English that well, but he proceeded to put on the headset and then walk off down the hallway. And he literally got to, before anyone could catch him, he got to the end of the tether and it yanked him backwards and knocked him on the floor. So for us, it's a matter of really just educating people as to sort of what to expect, what the expectations of VR are, and then really listening to them. That's one side of the equation is helping them, sort of talking to them about how to use the technology. The other side is listening to what they don't like about it, what's gone wrong with it, what makes them uncomfortable, and then trying to fix that and address that, whether it's latency issues or photorealism or what have you. So there's two sides to that for us.
I will admit I'm guilty of having shown a client a roller coaster ride in DK1 many years ago. I know. And so that client's now jaded with their first impression of VR is not a good one. And I think that that's a problem, because I'm surprised at the number of clients that come in and, no, we've seen VR, you don't need to show us, we know what it is. And all VRs or XR is not created equally, and I think there's differences, and I think, fast forward 3 years now, I'm in the process of educating clients in terms of what's possible. And one thing I'll add is when you're educating a client, when they see their project in VR, when they're vested in it, it's 10 times more valuable to them. So I could show a client, here's a demo of building A. Yeah. Here's a demo of your project. Almost identical, but it's their project. It's amazing. I'm going to go out and buy a VR headset today.
Yeah, I had a lot of experiences about that, trying just to sell my own senior level staff in VR was first coming out. And they're like, oh no, it's just one of those 360 gimmicks. I don't need that. And I was like, oh, okay. Just what are you working on? Give me the project file. Come back to me in 2 days, and I'll show you something. This is just the time we were doing 360 renderings. And the second they'd put the headset up to their face, it was like, order 10 of these, like right now. And for the most part, we do the same with our clients. We'll do maybe like a little mock-up demo, something along the lines that's just really quick and dirty, but it gets the point across. And when they do see their project, they are very much fully invested into it. One of the other bigger things we do see, and I've seen trending a little lately, is that we've had some clients just afraid to put the headset on. And we've learned if you remove the head strap, so they're actually just holding it and they can quickly pull it away from their face, they're much more open to then trying it. And then once they get comfortable with it, they want to stop holding it, and you put the head strap back on, and they're good to go.
Boxes of head straps.
Yeah.
Yeah, those Go4Ds work really well for that too. We've had clients put the headsets up to their face and just kind of stare straight ahead, and you got to tell them you can look up, you can look left, you can look right, but they feel kind of constricted.
Yeah, the Go4D, by the way, is this right here, and it's nice because it just slips right onto a phone. I'm not sponsored by them, I promise. And yeah, it's just a really easy way to show an experience in a very non-committed kind of way.
In this thing, we actually did a huge investment internally. Every year we have an internal expo thing, and about 1,000 people are coming there. And we actually run a VR event with them, so they get a 15-minute experience in an HTC Vive, the first thing they actually saw. And it was really interesting to see how non-gamers react, and people who are not really in this at all. And it was very interesting sitting and having interviews with them afterwards. And the response was awesome. If you have something that has fully 6 degrees of freedom, no lag, you are interacting and doing things, everybody gets, awesome response, really awesome response. But then again, if you then go back to a normal phone with a Google Cardboard on, and then you move around and feel the lag, then you start appreciating the good things. And of course, in a few years, everything will be that good, probably.
Martin just reminded me of a really crucial thing we found with introducing non-gamers to VR. Don't make every button on the controller do something. One button, if you can, make it one button, because if you're putting a headset on and putting a foreign object in someone's hand and they have no idea what it is, and you're saying the joystick does this, and this button does this, and this does this, they're just going to feel stupid and they're not going to want to do it. So,
one thing that was really interesting, and of course, showing IKEA products to IKEA managers is easy. But what we did was we put a physical chair in the virtual space at the same place. So we took away the hand controllers, and then they have been walking around in a virtual space for a little while, and then they were reaching out for a physical thing in the virtual space, and it was in the same place. Everything was perfect, and then that made it sell the whole thing. That's actually part of the Steam thing that we have out there. You can try it out if you want to.
So as this technology matures even further and we experiment more with it, is there an ultimate winner or an ultimate format that you know, becomes the most useful? Or
I mean, I feel like from at least my experience, we feel like the 6 degrees of freedom being able, and once wireless comes in, that's probably going to be it. Because people want, the first thing anyone ever does, even if it's just a Google Cardboard and they put it to their face for the first time, the first thing they want to do is take a step forward. And you're like, no, 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 don't walk, don't do that. As in terms of platform, though, I mean, I don't know who. I guess whoever really gets there first, for the most part. But a way a lot of the real-time engines are going, they're realizing that there's so many different platforms out there. Even they are trying to standardize the code. So even if I have a Vive and you have a Rift, it's not going to be difficult for me to publish to both devices. So yeah, I really think it's just going to be sort of that wireless freedom. And even then, you know, and I don't like people comparing VR and AR. They're actually completely different mediums for me. And they both have their own use cases where VR is like, the place does not exist, you're going to use VR. If you want to bring something into place, then you're going to use AR.
World scale tracking is a big one for us. Both that'll come, I think, with certain implementations of even the Windows mixed reality headset, since you have inside-out tracking. Oculus Santa Cruz is going to have some level of that. And even actually with AR Core and AR Kit now, we've done some experiments with actually using the AR functionality to track motion. So I could walk from here all the way down to the exit sign over there on a phone, and it would actually track motion that entire time. So when you start imagining putting someone in a warehouse or a big field that is actually the size of their project, and they can just walk around like they're there and not deal with, you know, teleportation or anything that removes them from a sense of immersion, that's something that people seem to be really excited by.
So do you think that they all merge, AR, MR, VR, there's one?
That's a great question, O'Brien. I think eventually they do. Yeah, that's just my personal take on where the industry is going. But I imagine we're actually going to get to the point where you'll have very discrete goggles, we might even call them glasses, and you'll essentially be able to toggle between, you know, turning off the world and in a virtual space, or still looking at the world and virtual objects are, you know, around you. And, you know, to a certain extent, I think it'll lend itself to people who are more naturally introverted versus extroverted for what they use it for. Although that's more on the personal side. On the enterprise and business side, you know, like I think it was Scott or David who was saying that, yeah, I mean, both have their own use cases. And I think even when they do eventually merge, you are going to see them being used for different things. Walking around on a project site when that project site is eventually going to have a building on it, and looking at a virtual overlay of that building is phenomenal, but sometimes you either can't do that or you want to be, you know, collaborating with people from all over the world, and that's when VR is handy because it is location agnostic.
Yeah, not to moderate, Jeff, sorry. It sounded like where he was going. And it's interesting, I did the same test with AR Kit, where I was able to, with my iPad, walk across an environment, but it didn't click like this could be, you know, a replacement. I think mixed reality and augmented reality sort of become one. It becomes mixed reality, but I still see a distinction between VR and MR, and that those stay separate for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I see the trend towards the merge for sure. I think if you're talking about right now, who's the winner, they both have very different use case scenarios, like you said. It's the ease of use and the cost for static is a no-brainer for a lot of our clients. They want it on cardboard, they want it on Samsung Gear VR. But if you want that destination wow experience, that launch event where you have to have a lot of firepower and you want the Vive or the Oculus, that gives you a whole different kind of deep dive into the experience. So they're very different. Again, I think, yeah, if Project Santa Cruz sort of hits and we get untethered real time, that will be the game changer and perhaps the winner there. But right now, they both have very different uses, needs, costs, and it's just, we just go where our client wants to go with it.
So in a similar vein, but more on the content creation, authoring side, do you think the way that we do this 5 years from now will be with one or a new game engine, for example, or will it be the offline renders now evolve where the hardware is fast enough that our offline renders become real time?
And there is where I'm struggling. We have been using computer graphics for 10 years now, and we have a library of about 33,000 furniture things for IKEA, all in high-end definition and everything, and are not at all done for real time. But then we would like to automatically convert that to something, and any game engine or WebGL or whatever is there out there. And there is no generic format for it, and it's no generic way of describing materials and all that. And that's my biggest concern. And we don't have to solve it today because we don't do that big productions. We have the AR thing that is running on the iPhone, and it has 2,000 products in there so far. But then as soon as we are doing more and more and using different engines, we will run into problems because we would like to have this in an automated way somehow. Yeah, and so a generic way of describing materials would be perfect for us because we don't have a project and then we forget it. We will reuse our assets over and over again until they're not sold anymore.
I feel like a good bridge or something that's going to pop in to help with that is going to be light fields. I don't know if anyone's gotten a chance to really experience a light field. Is Lytro here? No? Okay. Well, anyways, Lytro's been doing some really awesome work with Chaos Group, and I got to try out one of their demos earlier this year in Venice, and it was extremely impressive. Like, I mean, it was the ray tracing power of V-Ray and the 6 degrees of freedom that you get in a real-time engine, and it looked spot on. It was beautiful. And I know NVIDIA's been playing with some of that and a few other companies. So I don't know if we'll see. That may be the merger of real-time and offline rendering, but I think the hardware is going to have to drastically speed up before we start getting 90 frames a second at.
Well, that particular format has massive I/O issues.
It's got its own limitations too that we have to solve. So I mean, light fields aren't going to be here tomorrow, but 5 years from now, I would hope there's a reasonable solution out there for them.
I'll make a prediction. I think 5 years from now, we're all going to be doing a heck of a lot more WebVR. WebVR is still pretty early on right now. For those who don't know, the idea basically is you go to a web link, you're not downloading an app to your phone or your desktop computer. It's a single website that you get a VR experience from. There's also usually a non-VR version if you don't have a headset, and it works on all platforms. And so I don't think one particular piece of like video game software is going to win out, but I do imagine all of them at some point are going to be forced to support WebVR because it is by far the most accessible way to offer an experience to people.
So what are you guys most excited about with this technology in our industry? Is there something that you've seen that's coming up, or just something in the way that you're implementing that really gets you guys excited?
I really like sorry, you can go ahead. I like the Vive tracker stuff. I'm really excited by all that. So we've been doing a lot of experiments where we'll have 3D models of real-world objects, and you can take that, and IKEA, of course, can do this very well. If you have the 3D model of that real-world object, and then you put a Vive tracker on it, then it can exist both in the real world and in the virtual world in a kind of mixed reality sort of way. So it can be really cool to set up, an empty space or a room, and then put certain key objects or walls or custom, if there's any kind of custom architectural moments taking place and you have a mock-up of that, it's really cool to put someone in a VR experience where they actually are reaching out and feeling the touch experience of that. I don't know if anyone's done The Void before. It's kind of a big video game arcade. There's a few locations around the world, but they're doing a more proprietary version of that, and to mixed results. Some of it's really good, some of it isn't, and the possibilities of the Vive tracker and other things like it to do a more merged virtual experience that feels that much more real is very exciting to me.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the tactile experience is really cool. Companies like 6 Sense developing the tactile suits and so forth is really interesting. I guess with the risk though of finding out that Elon is right and we're really living in a simulation, and VR is some kind of cruel, ironic joke, but that kind of stuff is kind of cool. It's right now you still have that barrier of you just have this headset and that's pretty much it. There's some gloves and things like that that people get to try, but if you could do a full immersion and feel the wind on your face and things like that, I think that's where people want to see it go. So.
There is, by the way, a peripheral that will blow wind on your face. It's just had a Kickstarter campaign.
I think one of the coolest things I saw this year done with VR, and especially the HTC Vive, was in Venice with the guys from Brick Visual who mounted an HTC Vive tracker on a camera, rigged it up on a jerry mount, and then was able to film on a green screen and take that tracking data and pump it right back into 3ds Max and do all their camera movements from that, and then render out an animation and do all the compositing. That was actually pretty impressive. And then even taking that a step further, like also hearing how Disney is filming The Lion King completely in VR is something else too. Because I know they're calling it a live action movie, but I think it's all CG, so it kind of makes sense that you could do that.
Interested in all these things VR, and we haven't talked a lot about MR and AR, and that's just still a research part for us. But something I'm interested in seeing with mixed reality is not only the building in its footprint as you walk down the street, but being able to be 2, 3, 4 blocks away and see foreground obstructions removed. And I'm not talking about a light pole or a trash can, but foreground buildings instantly matted out, so you could see a future skyline with all the buildings in place, slipped into the city. I don't know if it's going to be with depth sensors at that distance, or maybe it's real-time photogrammetry based on sort of the movements, but that'll be really interesting.
Yeah, if you look at what we do and what we sell at IKEA, then everything we do is in room scale, in interior, some kind of thing, and everything is not individual products, it's like functions. So the three-dimensional space, and especially mixed reality, is something that is really interesting for us. And virtual reality is a stepping stone towards that. We need the same kind of assets, we need the same kind of groundwork done. And it's more powerful, as you were saying over there before, so you can have a high-end machine doing stuff. But in the end, mixed reality with some kind of glasses or lenses or whatever will come in the future is where we are looking into the real use case for us. Because you would like to see furniture in your own home. That's no secret. I guess most people would understand that.
So kind of the opposite of the previous question, is there anything you've seen with VR that scares you in the way it's evolving or the way it's been used?
It probably isn't specific to our industry, but the data is a mixed bag, you know, for us, especially when things start to happen with more eye tracking and foveated rendering and all the wonderful things that can come from that. The fact that all of this data can start to be collected, you know, that's great if you're using it in a really productive way. You're looking at the way users are eventually going to use a built space, things like that. But then also knowing that virtual reality and augmented reality, to a certain extent, have the potential for a lot of recorded data about what you are doing, everything from what you're looking at to how you're moving your body to what you spend the most time in. You know, that's not great.
I think one of my biggest concerns is that we start relying too much on, I think, like push button VR, and that we become very dependent on that. And not because I feel like it's going to put me out of a job. In fact, I think it might do the opposite. But I feel like we start selling our clients these just like, oh, let's put it in VR, button push, there it is, button push, there it is, button. And then they one day go, well, my 14-year-old can do this. What are you bringing to the table to me? And then you're like, button push. And that concerns me a little bit, because just even come from Gensler, I've actually even experienced that in the past with doing like really simple renderings out of like some applications like SketchUp and Lumion and whatnot, where it was just like so simple. We're like done, screenshot, there's your rendering, and then all of a sudden the client's like, my 14-year-old can do this. What are you bringing to the table? And then they call me and they're like, you need to do 20 renderings by the end of the week, and then you need to make them all photographic. I'm like, okay, and that kind of scares me. And so I would like us to, I guess, maybe focus on again the why. The storytelling, the extra bit of work that needs to go in there, I think, is something we need to keep our sights on.
What advice would you guys give to people that are wanting to get involved with this technology that maybe are just early in their research stage, or maybe haven't even started yet, and maybe they don't know where to start? What would be your advice?
There's so many places to go to find out information. You can find out stuff by coming to events like these, obviously. You can go online to free tutorials on YouTube. Unity and Unreal have some free tutorials as well. Then there's paid tutorials like Udemy and so forth that you can use, which are very effective. I think just networking is a really big one. In every city, there's so many VR events going on, local events. At Transparent House, we host one about every quarter, where we bring just the general public in and anyone who's interested to kind of talk about VR, what's going on. We're starting sort of podcasting to kind of get just general messaging out there about the technical side, about the creative side. So you can absorb it in so many ways. You've got so many, access points to get in. Send me a resume. We're hiring right now as well. So.
Yeah, we live in an incredible age, and the access we all have now to forums and YouTube videos and all that to teach ourselves, and it's incredible. And then you have companies like Autodesk, of course, offering software educationally for free. That's all wonderful for the industry. I think there's a misconception that a lot of people have that doing anything in VR is a very different workflow from what they're used to, when in fact, you know, if your day-to-day work involves 3D modeling, lighting, texturing, rendering, any of those, you're kind of on your way to figuring out how to do this. And I tend to phrase to people who are looking to get started with this that, you know, it's a lot like learning guitar. People who, you know, a lot of people learn how to play guitar, and at first they can be kind of intimidated by it. But I was when I was a kid, and my dad was like, you know, Alex, there's like 100,000 songs you can play if you learn 4 chords. And so I frame it as that way. And I play guitar now, and I can play even more than 4 chords. And when I'm talking to people who want to get started in some of this stuff, I try to phrase it like that to them, like whether you want to learn how to code in C# or start understanding a little bit about how you optimize 3D geometry for VR, you know, there's a couple bar chords, so to speak, that once you learn those, you can do 80% of the work you need to do. And then once you feel comfortable with that, the finer detail and the more complex work isn't going to be as intimidating.
I think those that are just getting started out, ask why. You know, sort of answer that question first. There's a wealth of knowledge online. I think going to the meetups, the conventions, the conferences to get your hands on these devices is really valuable. If you're just starting out, there's only so much you can get from the internet. You need to get inside of these devices and get your hands on. And there are so many that it's difficult as you're just starting out to get a big collection of every device that's out there. But there's a lot of meetups that you can go, and people are bringing devices, and be a good way to start.
So to kind of piggyback off that, the biggest thing people usually ask me is like, well, what do I get? What do I do? My response is find out what fits in your budget and then just buy it and roll with it. Because all of this stuff, regardless of which, is it 5, HTC, any of it, you're going to be able to generate VR content, and you're actually going to be able to sell your idea if you've got a solid why, regardless if it's just a 360 rendering or something that's interactive. And so if you're trying to figure out what to buy, just look at the price, look at how it fits into your pipeline and how it works, and then just get rolling in it. Because if you dwindle on it too much, you're never going to get anywhere if you keep focusing on that.
Yeah, and guys, the price drops on this technology have been insane. I mean, a year ago, to get an Oculus Rift with sensors and hand controllers was $800, and now it's $400. And there's all sorts of Black Friday sales coming up. So anyone who's like, maybe I want to get one of these, you know, this is a good time.
Sure you're not selling them?
Huh?
Sure you're not selling them?
I'm not. I promise, no commission. Yeah.
One other quick thing too, I mean, don't be afraid of being in any specific industry as well. Like, you know, a lot of us come from different backgrounds up here, and as I said earlier, we hire across the board in terms of people on the tech side, people on the creative side, people that come from architecture, people that come from film. So I think you can enter the VR marketplace from many different, you know, places. They're all valid.
Yeah, and I can finalize this by saying that I think that what computer graphics and 3D has been the last 20 years has been a little bit confined into a certain industry. And let's just look at us, and companies like us will probably have assets in 3D and then start doing interaction in 3D, and then we start having user interface in 3D. So if you're new to this, I think it's a perfect time to get into this. And it doesn't have to be game, it doesn't have to be architecture or retail. It will probably be everywhere in 10 years.
Design's design.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a couple minutes left here, and probably maybe get 2 or 3 questions. Is there anybody in the audience that has a question for our panelists? Maybe we'll try to get you to say it without a mic, and then I'll repeat it. If that doesn't work, then we'll have to run a mic to everybody here. So go ahead. So just to repeat the questions for people online, the gentleman in the front row has been trying to implement this technology in the healthcare industry, but it's kind of running into problems. So,
what are the points of resistance for you? What are you trying to do, and where is it being resisted?
We're trying to use it as part of the design process. We're trying to use it as part of the design process, and I think it intimidates the designers, and they're afraid to I mean, they're already busy and they already have tools that they're used to, that they're efficient in. So I think they see it as something that's going to slow them down instead of help them, their clients make decisions quicker. Any ideas on what I can do with the staff, maybe to have fun, or I don't know, something to get them more comfortable with it?
I don't know if this works, but one thing I did with some of the IKEA designers was I let them into Tilt Brush and let them try that out. In the end, I have to kick them out because they were doing everything in there. It's so creative, and it can get like the fear of using a VR headset or the fear of being in there, getting that out. I don't know. Any other suggestion?
That's actually a really good point. I would say, and this is how I sort of tackled it at my firm, is that I found a project that was, I'm not going to say struggling, but maybe needed some visualization help. And I asked them what the biggest design issue they were having at that time was. And then if I knew I could solve it with VR, I went ahead and did it for them. Now the downside is you're probably going to have to do that on your own time, and you're probably not going to get paid for it. But if you're really trying to make it happen, like if you can just solve that problem and say, hey, look, this is the experience when you walk into the atrium. This is what it feels like. You put the headset on them, and it's their project that they're invested in. You get them automatically. And then it's like, how many can we order? How do we do this? And you start getting that, because as soon as you start solving that problem for them in a new way that is faster in a sense, yeah, you've got it.
Yeah, I think just opening up and listening to them, interviewing them about what it is that they're just having trouble with and making it fun. I agree. If you can make it fun for them and show them that it's not all about your solving that specific problem and sort of seeing the resistance because I already have a way to do it, but show them that the technology itself is kind of fun to use and does things that from a tangential point of view kind of gets them in there, that could be pretty effective as well.
I'll just give a really quick specific example. So I was working with a theater consultancy that part of the design problem of designing theaters, of course, is checking sight lines and making sure everyone has a good view to the stage. And so, yeah, I built a VR application that allowed you to drop into any seat in the hall and you see that view. And wow, looking around and getting a sense of scale and feeling present and seeing the stage and being able to lean and see how that changes the view, you know, that's 1,000 times better than a flat rendering workflow, which is what had been in place for 15 years. So yes, I agree with everyone.
Any other questions in the audience? That's right here. Maybe just wait for the mic to come to you there.
Hello. So I'm still in college right now. So with the VR, kind of, you guys are saying that implementing into your companies is having different people trying to learn about it. Do you guys see going into higher level institutions or even high schools actually promoting it within our schools themselves? So by the time we actually come to work for a company or under you yourselves, that we actually would know what you want from us instead of having to learn it on the fly when you have us to do whatever else that we have to do, but we could learn it within school.
Yeah, coming directly to you guys. We've started doing that at TH already. I just did a talk at my son's school, actually. I've got kids who are 1, 7, and 9, and I went into their school and the middle school after that as well, just to kind of introduce the technology to them and sort of, feel out where they might want to see it. Is it on the education side? Obviously, on the gaming side is a no-brainer. But getting out there and doing outreach to the younger generation is absolutely essential. They're going to be defining kind of the language of VR, the expectations of VR. So we make it a point to get out there and sort of give these little classes to organizations like that. Higher level education, of course. I mean, we do outreach to, on the business level, it would make perfect sense on the college level as well. We do these lunch and learns where we go out and kind of demo the technology and sort of talk, make it a frank discussion about sort of what you guys are seeking in it, what your expectations are, what your preconceptions are, and things like that. So, yeah, I would say just make an outreach to, local companies that might be in the space and see if, invite them in and see if they'll come and do a lunch and learn for you guys or host you over at their facility. We would do that if you called us. I would say, come on over, bring your class over, and we would do an evening event for you guys. Absolutely.
Can we do that over winter break?
Say that again?
Can we do that over winter break?
I can't understand.
Like winter break? Are you guys free then?
Winter break?
January, January?
Yeah, absolutely. Where are you based out of?
Cal Poly San Luis Obispo.
Okay, yeah, we're downtown San Francisco, so.
Yeah, I think we're doing some middle school training, introduction, but I haven't looked at higher education. I think if you do reach out to groups in your area, they would be happy to go there, because every time we show this to somebody, we learn something about it, and so it's a reward for us as well to sort of see how people are thinking and how they're processing the information when they're in their VR.
And just piggybacking on that, we're running out of time here, but I just want to say that some of the educators I've seen, for anyone who's thinking about actually trying to implement this into a curriculum, it's particularly nice when these tools and techniques and different software are being used in a way that isn't just in service of, let's use this as it's being used right now, but taking advantage of the sandbox quality that an academic environment can have some time to really push the tools and really see what happens when you push them, beyond what they can do now and maybe what they're going to be able to do in 10, 20 years. I went to Syracuse University, and they have a program there now where they actually are trying to get architects to think about what a design studio is going to look like in 50 years and use AR and VR and MR and XR to help visualize and represent and design what that experience might be like. And I want to see more, educational programs doing things like that.
And I think it's a natural next step adoption. When I was going to school, it was language lab, and then it was computer lab, and now we're seeing VR labs pop up in schools and so forth. So the expectation of how you're going to learn is essential, and obviously it's the youth that's going to drive that. And so my kids are already, every time I bring home a headset from work, it's like, it's unzipped, open, on the table. They're already digging into it. So they have a natural expectation to use the technology that way.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing is the majority of this software is now free, especially for education.
So I think that's our time today. So I want to thank all of you for joining us, both online and in person, and also thank you very much to our panel for helping us out today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.